In the far future of the 41st millennium, on a world the Imperium called Oromar, there was a city that gleamed like a crown laid upon a mountain. People didn't just call it a capital, or a fortress, or a hive. They called it simply the Golden City. It rose tier upon tier from the stone, rings of golden walls, cathedral spires stabbing at the sky, statues of armored angels looking down from every ledge. Bridges of shimmering light connected towers like frozen lightning. Macro cannons and lance batteries were hidden behind carved wings and serene stone faces, so that beauty and weapon merged into one. By day it shone. By night, it glowed like a second sun clinging to the mountainside. The people had a phrase they whispered whenever the sky growled or the auspex screens flickered with trouble. The storm watches. The storm defends. Most of them had never seen what that meant. To most, it was just an old saying, the kind that started as truth and turned into superstition over centuries. Only the oldest priests and the most secret of tech adepts remembered that once, long ago, something had stepped out of lightning and saved the city from burning. They said his name was Thor. On the 53rd day of the siege season, an apprentice augur savant named Lyra sat alone in a high observatory near the top of one of the Golden City's tallest towers. Her chamber was a forest of brass instruments, glass lenses and flickering hollow projectors. Servoskulls drifted between cogitators, whispering Benharik to each other. The air tasted of incense and dust and hot metal. Her job was simple. Watch the void, decode the data, and send her reports down to superiors who pretended they understood it better than she did. She had one hand wrapped around a dented tin mug of recaf when the stars on her main display began to go out. At first she thought it was a glitch. She tapped the console, coaxed the stubborn machine spirit awake with a quick prayer, adjusted the auspex filters. But the pattern didn't change. One by one, points of light vanished from the top right of her viewing field as if someone were erasing the universe with a giant, invisible thumb. Alarms inside the cogitator core chimed in tones she had never heard before. Warning glyphs burned across her screens. Numbers spiked off the scale. A cold weight settled in Lyra's stomach. "Come on," she whispered to no one, fingers flying across the controls. "Show me what you are." The auspex image zoomed in, cutting through static and radiation like a lens focusing through smoke. Something stepped out of the dark. It was not a ship. It was not a fleet. It was a shape impossibly huge, surrounded by a corona of fire, walking through space as if it were shallow water. Every rational part of Lyra's mind pushed back against what she was seeing, insisting it could not be real. But the machine spirits screamed their confirmation in terrified binary. The adjustments locked. The image sharpened. A giant strode between the fading stars. He was made of black volcanic rock, his surface cracked open with rivers of molten lava. The lines of that molten light traced ribs, muscles, the cords of his neck, like someone had sculpted a titan from cooled magma and then filled its fractures with the heart of a star. From his head rose a jagged crown of obsidian horns, each point wreathed in its own flame. In one hand, he held a sword not of metal but of roaring fire, its blade longer than most imperial cruisers. He turned his head slightly and, for a heartbeat, Lyra felt as if those twin suns set deep in his face were looking straight into her observatory. Her breath went shallow. The cogitator scraped ancient data from forbidden archives, piecing together scraps of old legends and corrupted files. Runes appeared at the bottom of her screen in a trembling line. Designation uncertain. Likely warp titan. Codename Surtur. Threat level extreme. Planetary extinction probable. Lyra did not scream. There was no time for that. She slammed her hand down on the alarm rune. Across the Golden City, bells began to toll. Sirens wailed in every district. Servoskulls projected flashing warning sigils onto walls and pavements. Civilians grabbed children and icons and ran for the bunkers carved deep into the mountain. Hab doors slammed. Market stalls were abandoned where they stood. On the outer walls, the Solar Guard rallied. Thousands of men and women in polished armor sprinted to the battlements, Lasguns humming as they snapped power packs into place. Massive defense laser arrays rotated upward, their lenses glittering. Angel statues split open to reveal macro cannon barrels swiveling into firing position. High above, Gothic starships of the Imperial Navy turned their prows toward the growing wound in the sky, engines flaring like torches in the dark. And in the highest tier of the Golden City, in a circular plaza ringed with rune-etched pillars, an ancient mechanism awoke. Lightning started small, a crackle between sigils, a spark along an inlaid copper line. Then it leapt, dancing from pillar to pillar, chasing itself in frantic circles around the plaza. Wind swirled out of nowhere, whipping robes and banners. Choirs of psychers and priests stood at the edges, chanting in unison, their voices shaking. Blood trickled from their noses and ears as they pushed their power into the old design. The air thickened, charged with something raw and wild. The sky, clear only moments before, darkened over the dais. Clouds boiled into existence directly above it, spiraling downward like a whirlpool made of storm. A bolt of lightning came screaming down from those newborn clouds, a pillar of pure white blue that struck the center of the plaza. For a heartbeat, the top of the Golden City vanished inside a sphere of blinding light. When it faded, there was someone standing there. He was taller than any human, broad-shouldered, his silhouette cutting clean against the smoldering air. Armor clung to his form like the work of a master smith who had known both war and art. Burnished metal plates inscribed with glowing sigils, black leather straps, armored boots ringed with subtle coils. A red cloak flowed behind him, snapping in the electric wind. In his hand, he held a hammer. It was massive, heavy-headed, but it didn't look like an ordinary weapon. It looked like a storm frozen into shape. Runes glimmered on its sides. Lightning slid across its face and down the haft into his gauntlet fingers, then crawled back into the sky. He blinked once, as if waking from a very long sleep. A high priest in gilded robes stumbled forward, dropping to his knees. "Storm Warden," the priest rasped, bowing his head so low his forehead brushed the scorched stone. "By the Emperor and the old oaths, you have returned." The man in the armor looked past him, out through the faint blue shimmer of the void shield above the city. He saw the giant approaching. Surtur walked closer with each step, each stride carrying him across distances that would have taken ships' hours. Embers fell from his fiery shoulders like meteor showers. Behind him, the tear in space rippled, a bleeding wound into some furnace realm. The armored man's jaw tightened. Blue light flickered briefly in his eyes. "He should have burned with the others," he said quietly. "Yet here he is in your Emperor's long night. Is it truly him?" The priest asked, fear making his voice thin. "The devourer from the old legends." "It is Surtur," the man replied. "Devourer of realms, walker of stars, breaker of skies. And you have built your shining city right in his path." The priest swallowed hard. "Can we stand against such a thing?" The man rolled his shoulders. The plates of his armor hummed softly as ancient power fields woke. He lifted the hammer just slightly, and the sky grumbled like something alive. "That," he said, "is why you called me High Priest." "Some still call you Thor," the priest whispered. A faint smile tugged at the corner of the man's mouth. "They remember more than I expected." The first blow from Surtur did not land on the ground. It landed on the sky. He swung his flaming sword almost lazily, carving a crescent of pure fire through the upper atmosphere. It smashed into the world's shield network, setting the heavens alight. The protective field around the planet flared from invisible to molten, a dome of burning glass stretching from horizon to horizon. Generators deep beneath the crust screamed as load spiked. Void shield projectors flickered. Entire shrines rattled as stone dust rained from vaulted ceilings. On the walls of the Golden City, a Solar Guard captain watched the sky turn red and felt all the bravado drain from his veins. "Emperor, protect us," he breathed. In orbit, Lord Captain Varro of the Gloria Invictus stared at the tactical display, then keyed open the wideband Vox. "All ships, this is Varro. We engage, full burn. Repeat, all ships engage that thing now." Imperial Navy vessels adjusted course, engines burning hard. Lances of brilliant light speared out from their prows, stabbing at Surtur's Titan-sized silhouette. Macro shells, each one a fortress-sized bullet, roared through the void and exploded against his molten skin in fountains of solar fire. He slowed. For a moment, It looked as if the barrage would force him back. Then he turned his head, eyes narrowing. To him, the cruisers and battle barges were gnats buzzing around a bonfire. His massive, fire-wreathed hand swept out almost lazily. A wave of flame rolled from his palm. One ship vanished without noise, turning into a smear of expanding light. Another spun out of formation, its hull deforming as sections turned molten. Secondary explosions walked down its spine. Watching from the city, Thor exhaled slowly. For all their iron churches, he murmured, they still don't know when to step aside. He looked at the priests and adepts ringing the plaza. Open your storm grid, he said. Every coil, every conductor this city has. Give it to me. A tech priest's vox grill crackled in protest. The storm grid stabilizes the void shields. Diverting significant power will collapse approximately 57% of the upper dome. Estimated casualties if I don't hit him now, Thor cut in, eyes hard. There won't be citizens left to count. The high priest hesitated only a heartbeat, then nodded sharply. Do as he commands. Rituals were performed in seconds that should have taken minutes. Switches were thrown. Brass levers clanged. Deep beneath the city, miles of coiled conductor began to turn, aligning their channels with the plaza. Lightning stirred again. This time, it didn't fall from sky to ground. It surged from the city itself, arcing from tower to tower, racing along gilded statues, jumping between spires. The Golden City became a web of crackling light, every engraved line and circuit glowing as power rushed through. It all converged on Thor. He planted his feet in the center of the dais and raised his hammer high. Come on, he growled under his breath. Wake up, old friend. The storm obeyed. Clouds thickened overhead into a swirling vortex. Thunder rolled in continuous waves. A column of lightning slammed from the sky into Thor, exploding around his armor in brilliant arcs. Most men would have been turned to ash. Thor didn't simply endure it. He took it, bent it, pulled it through himself like a conductor. The glow in his eyes flared. The runes on his armor burned white-hot. With a roar that rattled the teeth of everyone in the city, he hurled the storm upward. The bolt that left his hammer was thick as a hablock and bright enough to sear sight. It crossed the miles to Surtur's chest in a heartbeat. The impact staggered the giant. His body arched backward, magma spraying in an arc. The light of the world's shield and the storm bolt tangled, turning the sky into a mad whirl of blue and red. Surtur's burning gaze dropped. For the first time, he truly saw the Golden City. The gleaming fortress clinging to the mountain, its spires lit by stolen lightning. The tiny figure standing at its peak, cloak whipping, hammer raised. A crack split Surtur's molten face in something like a smile. He began to descend. The moment his foot touched the upper atmosphere, entire weather systems died beneath him. Clouds burst into steam. Winds rose to hurricane scream. On far shores, oceans heaved, tides surging violently. Every step closer made the air over the Golden City heavier, hotter. Ash began to fall, dusting roofs and armor in gray. On the wall, soldiers squinted up through the thickening haze, trying to comprehend the scale of the thing walking toward them. Lyra should have been in a bunker. Instead, her fear had pushed her up, not down. She ran through tilting corridors and down smoke-filled stairwells until she burst out onto a high balcony. The city spread below, the world beyond glowing orange. The shadow that fell over her made everything else disappear. Surtur dominated the horizon, towering beyond the outer plains. His legs were pillars of fire. His sword trailed a ribbon of molten destruction behind him. Every breath he exhaled sent rolling waves of heat across the landscape. Lyra's mind went blank. She might have stayed there, frozen, if a low voice hadn't rolled over the balcony. Inside, little Star Watcher. She spun. Thor stood a few paces away, the hammer resting lightly on the floor. Up close, she could see the scratches on his armor, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the way the air itself seemed to bend around him, full of static. You, she stammered. I tracked him first. Surtur. I saw him step through. I thought, if I saw what you're doing with my own eyes, maybe I wouldn't be so afraid, Thor finished for her, not unkindly. Lyra swallowed, then nodded helplessly. "Does it help?" he asked. Seeing him like this, she looked back at Surtur, at the flaming sword rising for another blow, at the way the ground itself seemed to melt under his steps. "No," she whispered. "Not at all." Thor let out a short, rough laugh. "Good. Fear keeps your eyes open. Remember that when you tell this story." "If I live long enough to tell it," she said quietly. "You will," Thor replied. "That's why I'm here." He stepped up onto the balcony's edge, balancing easily despite the tremor that ran through the stone as Surtur set his next foot down. Lyra's hand shot out, gripping the railing. "Can you really stop him? Something that big. Something that old." Thor glanced back at her, and lightning flickered behind his pupils. "No," he said honestly. "Not in the way you mean. You don't kill fire like that. You only send it away for a while." The helpless ache in her chest tightened. "Then what are you going to do?" He looked out at the Golden City, at its spires and walls and the faint glow of the bunkers buried deep beneath. "I'm going," he said, "to make sure he never forgets this place." Thor stepped off the balcony and dropped. Wind tore at his cloak as he fell. The world rushed up in a blur of red and gold and smoke. He raised the hammer, feeling the storm grid still humming through the city, its power surging up through his bones. "Come on then, Surtur," he shouted, his voice cutting through thunder and fire. "Once more, find me in your way." The giant turned, onyx horns framing a face of molten rage. A tiny streak of blue-white lightning plummeted toward him. Surtur raised his hand and closed his burning fingers around Thor as easily as catching a falling ember. Flames swallowed the thunder god. For a heartbeat, Lyra thought it was over. Then the fist erupted. A thunderclap snapped across the sky as a surge of lightning exploded outward. Surtur's hand blew apart in a spray of molten rock. Thor shot free, hammer first, trailing a ribbon of storm. He struck the giant's wrist with a blow that would have shattered a titan's armor, bursting open layers of cooled magma. Lava sprayed like blood. Surtur grunted, his arm jerking back. Thor landed on a floating shard of cooling rock, boots skidding. He used the momentum to leap again, bounding from fragment to fragment, climbing up the giant's forearm as if scaling a collapsing cliff. Each swing of his hammer drove another bolt of lightning into Surtur's flesh, carving open new fissures, cracking horns, scorching skin. "You are smaller than last we met, Thunderer," Surtur rumbled, voice shaking the city's broken stained glass. "And yet you still defy." "Someone has to make your day interesting," Thor shouted back, vaulting up onto Surtur's shoulder, grabbing onto a horn for support. "And your timing has always been terrible." He swung, burying the hammer in the side of Surtur's skull. Light exploded. The giant lurched. The step he was about to take toward the Golden City faltered. Instead of crushing the mountain, his foot slammed down further out, flattening an already shattered range. The shockwave still hit the city like a hammer. Walls cracked. Towers leaned. A section of outer fortifications simply fell away in a cascade of golden debris. One of the shield generators overloaded in a burst of light and smoke. Sections of the dome fizzled and died. Thor clung to Surtur's shoulder as the giant slowly straightened up again. Heat blasted around him, hot enough to warp metal. His armor's runes dimmed. Sweat dropped from his brow and sizzled on the hammer's head. "You cannot win," Surtur said, twisted mouth opening in a furnace grin. "This age is mine. Stars die. Worlds burn. I only finish what time has begun." "Maybe," Thor said, catching his breath. He could feel each heartbeat like a drum in his chest. "But not this world. Not today." He dropped from Surtur's shoulder, falling toward the broken plain below. As he fell, he stretched out his will, reaching deep beneath the Golden City, past bunkers and foundations, down into rock and old secrets. He found the world heart. It pulsed at the planet's core like a trapped storm. A sphere of metal and crystal, older than the Imperium, older than the Golden City, older perhaps than human memory on this world. It had powered the storm grid for centuries. Chained, regulated, harnessed. If he opened it fully, it would not survive. Neither, probably, would the mountain. He had burned worlds before to stop worse things. He had walked away from ashes more times than he wanted to remember. Faces flickered in his mind. Children huddled in the bunkers, the solar guard on the walls, Lyra on the balcony with fear and stubbornness sharing space in her eyes. Not this time, he thought. Not if I can help it. He drove the hammer into the ground. Power roared through him, ripping a cry from his throat. Lightning blasted downward, tearing through rock, racing along the old conduits built long ago to bind the world heart. Deep below, the sphere split open. For a breathless instant, the golden city became the center of a star. Lightning erupted from its core, shredding stone as it rose. It exploded out of the central plaza in a column of searing light, vaporizing everything it touched. Towers vanished. Statues turned to vapor. Empty streets and abandoned markets became a tunnel for the storm. The beam did not stop at the city. It speared upward into Surtur's chest. The world went white. Thunder came a moment later, a rolling detonation that flattened forests, sent seas charging at distant coasts, knocked ships tumbling in orbit. Light poured out of cracks in Surtur's body as the storm invaded him, filling every molten vein, burning everything that made him what he was. He screamed. The sound was like continents grinding themselves to dust. Chunks of cooling magma sheared off from his shoulders and arms, falling like meteorites. When they hit the ground, they shattered into glittering glass. In orbit, instruments overloaded. The Inquisitor aboard the Gloria Invictus watched the readings spiral into nonsense and slowly lowered her hand from the virus bomb case she'd been ready to open. "Cancel exterminatus," she said quietly. "Whatever that thunder thing is doing, it's worse than anything we can throw." On the plain, Thor stood at the center of the storm, hammer lifted, body half-silhouetted inside the blinding column. His armor was cracking, runes winking out one by one. Lightning crawled across his exposed skin, trying to claim him as part of itself. Hold, he told himself. Just a little longer. He could feel Surtur's essence tearing apart, fragments of the fire giant hurled back through the ceiling warp tier, scattered so thin it would take ages for him to pull himself together again, if he ever could. He could also feel the world heart dying, burning itself out in one last act of defiance. If he let go, all that wild power would spill sideways, racing along the crust, turning continents into glass. So he turned the hammer instead. As the world heart shattered, he angled the final surge of the storm up and out, away from the planet. A last concentrated spear of lightning shot through what remained of Surtur's chest and continued into space, carving a glowing path through asteroids, punching a hole through a small moon, then vanishing into the deep. The giant collapsed. There was no body, not in the way a mortal body remained. There was only a crater where Surtur had knelt, a vast basin of cooling glass and still smoking rock. The beam thinned. The clouds above the golden city began to unravel. Ash fell, soft and gray, like the mockery of snow. When the storm finally died, silence fell with it. Where the upper tiers of the golden city had stood, there were gaps, wounds, scarred stone. The highest spires were gone, turned to dust in the storm's face. Whole districts had been ripped away, leaving jagged edges and open sky where streets had once been. But the mountains still held. The lower rings of the city, the bunkers, the vaults, the crowded shelters packed with terrified citizens, they endured. The golden city had not fallen. Lyra staggered out onto what remained of her balcony days later, when the fires below had cooled enough to leave only smoke and the scent of burned stone. She stepped carefully past cracks in the floor and broken railings until she could see the crater in the distance and the wounded city below. Her eyes stung, not from heat this time, but from the weight of everything that had been lost and everything that had somehow survived. At the very center of the ruined plaza where Thor had first arrived, the stone was fused into a glassy circle, cracked and blackened. The dais was gone. The runic pillars were gone. There was no sign of a man, no hammer, no armor. Just scorched emptiness. "Storm Warden," she called softly, feeling faintly foolish. "Thor." Only the whisper of wind answered. She stood there for a long moment listening. Then, just as she began to turn away, the air changed. A breeze stirred, cool against her soot-streaked face. Clouds gathered over the city, slow and deliberate, though the weather stations had predicted clear skies for a week. The faint smell of ozone rolled in. Somewhere high above, thunder murmured, not the world-ending roar of a storm unleashed, but the low, distant rumble of a watcher clearing his throat. Lyra closed her eyes and smiled through her tears. "You're still here," she whispered. The wind picked up just enough to lift her hair. In the broken angles of the Golden City, chiming echoes bounced between shattered bells and cracked statues. For a heartbeat, Lyra could almost hear laughter carried on the breeze, warm and wry and tired. A thought brushed past her mind, not quite words, more feeling than sound. Tell them the storm watched. Tell them the storm defended. Years later, when the Golden City had rebuilt some of its lost spires and new generations ran through streets that still bore scorch marks from that day, they told the story of the world-burning giant that came out of the sky and the thunder god who stood in his way. Some called it myth. Some called it heresy. Some said it was just another strange miracle in an age that had forgotten how to recognize miracles when they happened. Lyra, older and lined now, kept her own copy of the tale written in a battered journal under her bunk. On the first page, in careful script, she had given it a title. What if Thor defended the Golden City from Surtur in Warhammer 40K? And on certain nights, when the sky over Oromar flashed with quick, unexplained lightning even though the weather was calm, children would point up at the clouds and whisper to each other in the dark, "He's still watching."